Welcome to EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. I'm your host, Russ Roberts of George Mason University and Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Our website is econtalk.org, where you can subscribe, find other episodes, comment on this podcast, and find links and other information related to today's conversation. Our email address is mail@econtalk.org. We'd love to hear from you. My guest today is Michael Munger of Duke University, economist extraordinaire, chair of the political science department at Duke University, and a frequent contributor to the Library of Economics and Liberty. Mike, welcome back to EconTalk.
Great to be back.
Mike, our subject today is your recent essay at the Library of Economics and Liberty, the title of which is Bosses Don't Wear Bunny Slippers. If markets are so great, why are there firms? I'm going to read the title again because some of our listeners may be, it's early morning, you're commuting, and that title may have just kind of...
I hope it didn't cause any wrecks.
Well, I hope not also, but I think it may have caught some people unawares. Bosses don't wear bunny slippers. If markets are so great, why are there firms? And as always, if you go to econtalk.org, you'll find a link to Mike's article and other issues that come up during the podcast. So if markets are so great, why are there firms is the question that you ask after the bunny slipper intro. One answer would be simply bewilderment, I think. Well, firms exist because they compete and they create markets. Let's all go home. But there's a deep insight in your essay, and that is that firms are almost anti-market. Explain the paradox.
The difficult thing, and this is something that you and I have talked around about in some of our other podcasts, and so I'm glad we're getting a chance to go into it a little bit more deeply. There's one of the things that markets do is organize people's activities, and prices are a way of organizing the activities of many different people who don't talk to each other, who have no communication with each other, and may not share many goals. Each of them is acting on their own, trying to further their own interests. And the remarkable thing about the market system is that it coordinates those actions and delivers results that actually allows people to achieve their goals of making themselves better off. Now, the paradox is that when I teach about production, I usually teach about it in a market context, and I talk about producers responding to prices. And in the essay, I have an example that I was actually kind of surprised. There's been a 40 or maybe a little bit more, 50% increase in the amount of corn that the country of Brazil has been exporting. It wasn't a decision of the government. It wasn't anybody told them to. It was because the worldwide price of corn has gone up as a consequence of the U.S. decision to use more corn for ethanol. So the way it works is U.S. makes a policy decision. Farmers in the United States plant a little bit more corn, but they can't compensate enough, so the worldwide price of corn goes up. So I'm living in Brazil, kind of out in the country. I noticed that the price of corn that's quoted in the town near me goes up, and I don't need to know why. I don't care why. Price has gone up. I'm going to plant corn. I'm not going to plant soybeans or something else.
And there could be 1,000 reasons for why that price went up. As you point out, the farmer doesn't need to know what the reason is. It could be because people suddenly decided they liked corn more. It could be because some corn crop was devastated somewhere else.
Well, actually, you've actually caught me. I'm red-faced. This is a podcast you can't see, but let me assure you I'm red-faced. I gave an explanation for why the corn price gave up. In fact, I have no idea. This is what I hate on MSNBC or those cable television programs.
Yeah.
Tell us why the price of some stock or some commodity went up.
Or the dollar.
Yeah, right. Nobody knows. So here you've caught me.
No, you're right, though. It's an interesting thing. I also have that same...
Well, we're smarter than everybody else.
Well, speak for yourself, Mike.
Okay, since that's not true, then you caught me.
But it's an interesting point because we understand in economics how the change in one thing can affect other things. The reverse doesn't always hold true. Because something changes doesn't mean we understand the causes. There's a long list of causes. We're pretty confident, I think, that you're right. We're pretty confident that the rise in the price of corn has been partly, at least, if not mostly, a result of a change in U.S. government policy toward ethanol. But it could be, we know it is affected by many, many other things.
Yeah, and the farmer not only doesn't need to know, doesn't care, off they go. Plant corn, and so the price of corn is going to go up by less than it would have because all of these farmers are led by the price of corn to grow more. But it's still gone up. They're going to make more money. They're going to be happy. Consumers are going to be happy. It all works well.
And I like the point you make in the essay that the price does the leading, which is an English language expression that we use all the time without any second thoughts to say the increase in price led the farmers to do X, Y, Z. But that's really a bizarre construction.
Adam Smith said that the individuals are led as if by an invisible hand. It's a fact. The fact is they're making choices. All these people in all these disparate circumstances are making choices. There's no reason to expect ex ante that they're going to add up. The beautiful thing about properly functioning markets is they do all add up. The aggregate consequence often is just what the individuals intended. Not always, but often. So the paradox, this was your question 30 minutes ago, the paradox is that, in fact, most economic activity, just in terms of numbers of employment, at least in developed economies, isn't led by price at all. It's led by directions from some boss. So
a little island of socialism in the midst of
command, at least.
Yeah.
So in your intro economics class when you were in the 9th grade, the professor, the teacher drones on about the different types, and one of them was command and control. And so we talk about how well markets use prices to lead people to do things that actually benefits both them and consumers. And yet the paradox is, why is it that then so many people are led by the explicit directions of some boss?
And putting it into historical context, in the 30s, when command and control economies were the rage and had a very attractive air about them, that is the Soviet Union. People went to the Soviet Union, visitors, and they came back and said, I've seen the future and it works.
Yeah.
Because they dispensed with this nasty commercial economy that we had where prices did all this and profits were the driving force behind things, and they just looked around.
They weren't making a political point. This was just an economic point. It works better.
Yeah, because someone's in charge, someone's in control of it, and
instead of chaos. And
there ensued this debate that we've referred to in a few other podcasts here, but I want to make it explicit. There ensued a debate, and the two main players in the debate were Abel Lerner and F.A. Hayek. Hayek arguing that a socialist calculation from the top down could never, no matter how great computing power was, which was something he didn't know about at the time, but even in the face of enormous computing power, that a socialist calculation could never mimic what a market creates spontaneously via prices. And Lerner and other economists arguing that, yes, with the right set of equations and so on, you could mimic the allocation of prices and perhaps do even better by satisfying social needs or social justice or whatever other goals you had beside making the pie as big as possible.
It is confusing. We as economists, or we as free market economists, often kind of anthropomorphize the market, and that means to make them as if they were sort of a person or a monarch.
Or, having consciousness.
Yeah, well, if not consciousness, at least agency. People are led as if by an invisible hand. So we call it the invisible hand. We call it the market. And for people who haven't studied economics or are skeptical about this, you can see why they would say, well, why? Why would you expect that? And it's a hard argument to make because it requires a pretty deep understanding.
Yeah, and it's not intuitive.
To the contrary.
Yeah.
When I say the monarch, or the leader, you think of a person.
And I think that's one of the reasons that socialism or centralization, which is really the part of socialism we're talking about here, why a centralized economy has such an appeal. Because someone in principle could gather the information about what people want and would like and what the costs of various production alternatives are, and then create a plan. And a plan is deeply, deeply appealing to us because I think for a number of reasons. One is the agency issue, that it seems better on the surface that having someone intentionally do something is better than hoping it'll turn out okay. But I think the other is, something I think about a lot, in our individual lives, planning is somewhat important. Despite a recent podcast that with Bill Duggan where we talked about the naivete of strategic planning and how unproductive it can be. For individuals, plans are often how you get stuff done. So, if you hope that the dishes will get done by themselves, you're going to be really disappointed.
If my wife and I get to the airport and I don't have the passports, then there was a problem with the plan.
Yeah, you were hoping they'd spontaneously emerge in your pocket or your luggage, and they didn't. So spontaneous emergence, which is really what we're talking about in the role that markets achieve, as economists, we understand those. As individuals, it's not only not intuitive, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
You really don't want to rely on the invisible hand.
No.
To do the dishes. It won't. So I think
there's a third factor, and this is something I'm sort of used to. I think both of the ones you mentioned are right, and maybe the most important. But the third factor is that we would like this anthropomorphic thing, doing the planning, to have our best interest explicitly at heart.
Good point.
We want them to have the right motives.
Right. We care about motives, and again, at the individual level, I do want people around me that want the best for me, but as Adam Smith pointed out, I don't necessarily want my butcher to care about what's best for me. And ironically, when the butcher cares mostly about the butcher, I get better meat and better prices. And I think that's
not obviously true about a plan, about an aggregate consequence for the economy. Whereas if we have a benevolent, kindly older gentleman we call the president who's doing this plan for us, maybe his name is Roosevelt, that makes me feel better because there's somebody watching out for my interests.
Who cares about me? And of course the politician exploits that by trying to act as if he cares about you whether he does or not.
He can have fireside chats and talk to me directly.
Put a little sweater on. It's very effective. But at this point, I think it's important to mention that in this debate between planning versus spontaneous order that emerges from a market, Hayek and others, Mises and others, always said that in the market-oriented view, of course there's planning, and it's done at the individual level. It's just not done.
And it's done with the right information, because I have prices that signal relative scarcities, not just now, but they're forecasts about the future.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing.
And so, in fact, only in a market system is it possible to plan, is what Hayek and Mises were claiming.
Because
you can't actually have a plan. It's not that it's hard. It's impossible without the prices, without the information about relative scarcity that prices give you.
So we come now to the paradox, which is the defenders of markets and the people who, from Adam Smith on, really going back before Adam Smith to Adam Ferguson, the people who cared passionately about this unintuitive working out of individual desires and plans into social results that were appealing. That is, prices leading people to do things that could never be achieved by a conscious planner. Despite that elegant and powerful system that we spend teaching our students, an enormous amount of economic activity, as you say, takes place in centralized organizations, which we call firms or companies or corporations.
Nonprofit organizations, maybe even government.
Yep. Where people within these organizations, and let's stick with firms, are allocating resources, people, material, capital, energy and effort, time, not via prices at all, but from the top down. Through a boss or leader or certainly a centralized decision maker or decision-making process that doesn't use the power of prices at all. So first, let's make sure our listeners understand that.
It appears, at least, that they're not really using the power of prices at all. And it is odd that in order to make profits, in order to organize large numbers of people, it appears that you have to suppress the market mechanism. And my wife reminded me this morning, where we were talking about bosses, not everybody admires their bosses, and she reminded me of the Dilbert Principle. The Dilbert Principle is that you should promote the least competent people into management where they can do the least harm.
Yeah.
As a department chair, I resent that very much.
Well, but you're not in charge.
That's right.
Chair is a is a highly misleading.
I prefer to think of it as an honor.
Yeah, it's just a chair, really. That's all it is. It's not a leader. But what's going on there? Not in the Dilbert Principle, which is.
Well, so that's obviously that's another problem. Why would you think the manager knows more than we said? We said the government can't do this with all its resources, with all the way that they have information, they can gather people, they can use the census. They can't solve this problem. How can the manager solve it?
Right. How is it that within an organization, bosses are bossing people around in the sense of deciding how many people will be in a particular part of the company versus another, not based on the profitability and wages. In other words, if one division of the company wants to expand, they just go out and hire more people if the boss approves it. They don't have to be a profit center. Most businesses can't or don't use profit centers or profitability of activity as
they don't use piecework. They don't use any contract that allows them to judge the marginal productivity of that person.
They make an estimate of whether it would be beneficial to the
they're called guesses.
And even in areas where there are profit centers, of course, there are whole areas of corporations, accounting, the legal team, the computing and information technology part of a firm, where the size of that is totally decided by the wisdom of the leader. The services are usually given away to the employees. You don't rent your desk, you don't rent your computer, you don't buy time off the mainframe or the server. You are just acting like a centralized economy within that firm. And the only thing in that view, the only thing that disciplines a firm is the extremely blunt mechanisms of hiring and firing and going out of business through bankruptcy, rather than what you'd think would be much superior, which would be using the market, using prices to make wiser, more efficient allocation decisions. So in particular, just to take one of these examples, the computing services example, the IT department of a university, say, or a profit-making firm has to decide what kind of computers to use and how many to have and what kind of backbone of server and other things to provide. And that just gets decided by fiat.
Yeah, the IT people, if my IT guy comes to me and I say, how much should we spend? And he says, well, how much have you got?
Yeah, he says, what's your budget?
Yeah.
That budget is just falls in your lap usually. You fight over it.
Yeah, well, I want more.
Yeah, you want more. Of course, everyone else wants more, so there's this internal tussle that's decided, again, not by market competition, but by political competition, by the jostling and argumentation and arguing among chairs with their department or within the firm.
And that's true in a firm too. It's not just because I'm in a university.
No, within a firm, people are constantly jockeying for position for budgetary expansion, and that decision is made not by explicitly saying, well, you earn such and such return on your assets, so therefore you get more. It's basically you make a report about your annual end of year, just in a similar way that the Department of the Interior might decide in the United States government, jostling at a cabinet meeting.
In exactly the same way, yes.
And that is unintuitive. Again, for those of us who are arguing, as we often do, for the virtues of market decisions, price-driven allocation, why is it that firms don't do more of that? Now, we should say right off, there are lots of firms that do try to introduce some sort of market mechanism within the internal decision-making of the firm. They have stock options that send price signals. They have profit centers, as we've talked about, where a particular division of a firm might have its own profit and loss statement. But I think the way to think about it is the zillions of economic decisions that get made day to day that aren't using profits and prices.
That apparently are not, yes.
Yeah,
that at the margin at least.
Just another example, you think about what a department store is. A department store is a strange thing. If you're Macy's and you're trying to decide how many shoes to carry or how much square footage within a store to devote to shoes, of course you're going to worry about how much that extra square footage costs especially measured by what you sacrifice in sales of cosmetics or other types of things you sell. But wouldn't it be a lot better to rent that space to a shoe seller and let shoe sellers compete to have access to that space? And yet that's not what Macy's does. Macy's has an in-house shoe department.
Right. And so my claim, and this is what infuriates many of my colleagues who are not quite so market-oriented as I, is I say, I know the answer to that question. I know which is better. And they say, well, what? And they think I'm going to present some sort of calculation. And I say, Macy's way is better, because if it weren't, they wouldn't be doing it.
Right. And we don't know why exactly it's better.
It's surprising.
By the way, you ought to fire those other people who don't agree with you, Mike. Are you the chair?
They have tenure.
Darn.
We can talk about that off the phone.
Well, but no, the truth is, what's fun about that is to say this in a more general way. Obviously, in an academic setting, we like to joke about how the chair isn't the boss, how the chair of an economics department or political science department is the herder of cats. An impossible job. You can't make them do what you want. But, of course, that's true in a business setting as well.
It's certainly true in many business settings.
We're joking about it. We're talking about how a CEO is the boss or the leader, or the entrepreneur would be the leader, but they can't boss people around either. And moreover, they can't just decide, I love shoes, I'm going to have half of Macy's be a shoe store because I love shoes. If they do, they'll go out of business. So as you argue correctly, the size of the shoe section of Macy's, or the size of the cosmetic section, or the size of the shirt section, those are determined not really by the leader of Macy's, but by competition between Macy's and other stores doing the same weird thing.
And it may not be the consequence of some conscious choice either. There's a famous old paper by Armin Alchian in 1950 where he talked about survival. Maybe Macy's just had a manager, a boss, an owner that really liked shoes. But it turned out that having the shoe section that large actually produced positive profits, even after accounting for the opportunity cost rate of return of the capital. And so as a consequence, that worked. They survived. There's no reason that I would look at particular animals or ants and say that particular morphology, the way that they're built, is going to make them survive. But if I come back in 100 years and they're still there, it worked. And that's the only reason that I think Macy's clearly has the right answer, is that they've survived and made money.
Yeah, Alcha was really talking about this issue of whether firms deliberately try to maximize their profits. And he said, we're
saying it's hard for managers to deliberately maximize their profits. They can't tell. They don't have prices.
Right. But through attrition and expansion of successful firms, things that work do survive, and things that don't work get weeded out.
And that's not to say that managers aren't trying to do that. They are constantly, partly because they have stock options and other reasons that make them what economists call the residual claimant. They get the excess. If the company becomes more profitable, that gives more bonuses or something to the manager. So they're trying.
Especially when it's the owner.
Yeah. If the manager and the owner are the same person, and that's what we probably ought to talk about, it makes it simpler. The manager and the owner are the same person. It's a relatively small firm. Everything that he makes, he gets to keep.
So the owner has the incentive to find and discover the right size of the shoe department, whether the shoe department should be rented out to an individual, another entrepreneur, et cetera. And whether that incentive works or not, Alchian was saying, isn't really important, in the sense that there are some managers who are going to do a bad job, but they will be eliminated through competition.
Yeah. It's not that everybody optimizes.
Right.
It's that everybody that survives managed to optimize.
Yes, correct. So
your listeners are saying, "What the hell about the bunny slippers? We got to get to the bunny slippers."
We'll get to the bunny slippers. I know they're on the edge. I know you're all on the edge of your seat out there. The excitement is palpable. But we will get to the bunny slippers. I just want to say one more thing about shopping malls, because I think it's such an interesting example. A mall is such a weird thing in contrast to a department store. I know we weren't talking about malls, were we? But I think about.
I started to. I thought that's the logical extension.
And I think of Macy's. Macy's doesn't sit by itself; it sits in a mall. And what's weird
it's
about
almost like a little mall itself, and then the mall is just an extension, so it's perfect.
Except here's the weird thing: Macy's is a centralized mini mall. So you've got the cosmetics, you got the shoes, you got the shirts, you got the housewares. But within the mall that Macy's sits in are businesses that have followed a totally different model, which is the mall owner rents out square footage, and if you can make your revenues cover your costs and pay your rent, you thrive. If you can't, you get thrown out of the mall. So within that mall, there are individual shoe stores.
Extremely specialized. They may just be women's shoe stores.
And they're competing with Macy's, and they have the profit incentive totally working within that shoe store. All it's got is its shoes.
Yep.
So it's totally riding or failing based on whether it can cover its rent. Mm-hmm. And within Macy's, they've got the centralized top-down thing, and yet they coexist. Mm-hmm. So a mall is like a market-oriented, price-driven set of economic activity. And within the mall, you've got these weird little islands, the so-called anchors of the mall, the large department stores, that are providing something else that's got to make up for the fact that they don't have those price signals working. So we'll come back to the mall because I think it's a nice application. But
one thing you said is really important. Maybe that's partly how the price system operates. I'm a consumer. I walk in, and maybe I shop. I look at 4 or 5 different places that sell shoes. One of them's Macy's. One of them is this little boutique shop. I actually am using the price system. The firm isn't so much, but I, as a consumer, am still using the price system.
That's a good point. But you might think, and this is, I think, the essence of it, you might think that as economists, we would say, well, don't go to Macy's. They're not going to get it right.
Their costs are going to be higher.
Their costs are going to be higher. Their selections, don't even bother shopping there. Go to one of these little individual stores that's in competition with each other, where you know that they're living and dying every day based on whether they've got the right mix of shoes, they've got the right quality, the right price points, the right things to serve the customer. Don't waste your time shopping. I mean, that'd be like going to. It's like saying, "Well, I have a choice. I'm going to either go to shopping in America or shopping in 1950s Poland."
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't go to Poland in 1950 to go shopping because
everything was cheap. They just didn't have anything.
And not only that, it's going to be shoddy because the workers they don't have any capitalism. And you'd be right.
Yeah.
You would find shoddy stuff there. Or it's like saying, gee, in the Soviet Union in the old days, where should you go shopping for produce if you've got the money? At the black market, where the farmers are growing their own stuff and making a profit, or in the state-owned farms. Well, you go to the black market because you're okay because the incentives are there. Whereas you go to the shoe department at Macy's, the manager of that shoe department, that guy's on salary.
Yep.
True.
He's looking at his watch, just waiting for the end of his shift.
Now, true, he can get fired. That's the economic incentive he faces.
But they've got tenure. They're
almost. It's hard to get fired.
Hard to fire them.
But not just legally, it's pretty much.
I meant cost. If I'm his manager, it's much easier for me to sit in my office and read the newspaper. I'm not making the profit either. Why would I watch the guy?
So how does this seemingly ineffective system?
You've convinced me. Let's go close down Macy's.
I think. Well, it's clearly some people are shopping there. A bunch of fools.
Well, but at least we should be able to buy it really cheap.
That's true.
Oh wait, no, its stock price is pretty high. That can't be right.
Could we be wrong? We could be wrong. Don't shut them down. We're joking.
I think you may be wrong. I don't know about me.
I'm always wrong. So then the puzzle is, let's go to the bunny slippers now. Something else must be going on in these situations that makes up for the inefficiency, and it is inefficient, to have this centralized provision of allocating goods and people, et cetera.
And it more than makes up for it. Because in terms of production, sales at retail, most things are done in firms, are done by firms. Some are done by these small little artisan places. But so in my essay, I have kind of a parable where a manager decides that he's going to outsource certain functions that are services, and he starts with janitorial services. And he's noticed that the janitors that work for him, they get decent performance reviews and they don't get fired, but they don't really work very hard, and some of them have been there a long time. They make a lot of money, and he could fire them, but that would be a lot of work. And he hates to go watch them because he has stuff that he needs to do. So he thinks, I'm just going to fire our entire janitorial staff and then use a market to do this because I'm going to contract this out. I'm going to outsource. our janitorial services. And while he's thinking about it, he says, we could also do this with our accounting services and with a couple other things that aren't that central. We'll do it with maintenance for our computers. So the three things: accounting, janitorial services, and maintenance for the computers. We'll hire somebody to do it, and if they don't provide us good service, we'll fire them. And I'll know exactly how much it costs, and most important, I'll take bids up front.
Yeah.
So that I know I'm getting the lowest price.
Yeah.
I'm going to make competition work for me.
Right.
Whereas the people we've got now, I have no idea. They've been paid wages here. Some of them have been here 20 years.
Maybe they're doing a horrible job.
Yeah, I just don't know. And I read this stuff about markets.
How could you possibly know? How could you keep track of all that stuff? How could you be a good judge of janitors and computer services and accountants and your legal staff? So let's get rid of them all. Let's just outsource all of it.
Yeah, well, those services we'll just outsource.
And by the way, when we talk about outsourcing, we don't mean to India. We just mean outside the firm. Now,
I live in a city, and so I'll take bids, and there's 4 or 5 different janitorial firms that within 2 days have a comprehensive estimate and bid. I can work on the different terms of it, and this is great. I will know how much toilet paper we use, how much paper we use, tissue paper we use for people to wash their hands. I'll know everything, and I'll have so much more information.
And if it turns out, if I get worried whether they're not doing the greatest job, which I worry all the time when they're in-house because I can't really know.
Yeah.
But when it's outhouse. Yeah, when it's out of house, I'll just call it out of house.
Okay.
When it's out of house, I'll just go out and get a new bid.
Yeah.
I'll just go find out whether
we'll have an annual contract. We'll incentivize these guys.
Yeah.
We'll renew it annually, and maybe I'll go with the same firm. Maybe I won't.
I'll sleep well at night. Boy, that's going to be better.
Yeah.
It's going to be much better.
And so I do this, and 6 weeks later, profits are up. The stock price is up 18%. What a genius I am. And, Christmas is coming up. I'm going to get a really big bonus for my family. And I'm thinking, now I am a manager. I am really making things work. But then I think, well, wait, we've got all these other employees. And I really don't know what they do. There's these cubicles, and then there's the production facility. We've got guys that design stuff. We've got guys that build stuff. We have a whole huge shipping department. But this is a really highly developed capitalist economy. I can contract for all of those services.
I mean, just take the simplest thing like the brochure and the annual report. I don't need any people to design those. Why would I pay people in-house? I don't know if they're doing a good job. I'll just get bids, like you said before, and I'll get someone, the best person, not just my best guess of who's the best person, but I'll use competition.
Yeah. And when we're done with that, they'll go do something else. I don't need to pay them all the time. I don't need them on staff.
Yeah, think of all the time they're wasting. I can't. How do I know whether I've got enough work for all those people?
Yeah, they're going out to lunch early. You know how those people are.
Yeah. So keep going.
I decide I can go beyond that. I don't need a building. So I fire all of my employees and sell my building.
Beautiful.
All of this, it's going to happen 30 days from now. And, I hear some grumbling, but okay. And then on the 31st day, the day after all of my firings and selling of the building have taken place, I don't even go to the office. I don't shower. I don't shave. I put on my bunny slippers. I get a cup of tea, sit there in my robe, go over to my computer at home, and just wait for the huge increases in profits and my bonuses to come in. Turn on my computer, and I have 1,400 new emails.
Why?
People are trying to contact me. They have questions. Stuff has gone wrong. I look at my cell phone, and I've missed over 400 calls. It turns out that some of my suppliers, some of the people that I've written these contracts with, since I've written contracts that anticipate less than all of the possible things that might happen, because I can't anticipate every contingency. In fact, I can't even anticipate many contingencies, and these contingencies actually interact. So I go through a couple hundred of these calls and a couple hundred of these emails, and it turns out that the really big problem is my main supplier upstream that I've contracted with, the guy that makes the stuff I need to make the stuff that I make, hasn't delivered. So I shower, I shave, I put on my suit, I get in my car, I run over there, and I say, you haven't delivered the stuff, we need the widgets. And he looks at me and says, now who are you? I'm sorry, I don't know you, sir. And I tell him my name, and he has this long list, and he looks, I see, yeah, you're right. We're running a little behind, and it's going to be like the end of the week, maybe Monday or Tuesday before we get that to you.
And you make a mental note, have lunch with this guy sometimes, so maybe he'll remember who I am.
I've got to do this with 100 people.
It's a lot of lunches.
So instead of writing little contracts, now I'm trying to establish personal relationships where I can direct these guys to do what I want. Because I can't write contracts that have all these contingencies in them. So I go home after 3 or 4 days, and none of the deliveries have taken place. The people I've contracted with go to other projects. Stock price plummets. I am fired. And the new manager of the firm desperately is making phone calls trying to rehire all the employees that I fired and find a building for them to work in.
And when he rehires them, he doesn't hire them on a piecework basis. He often is going to give them an annual salary with all the freedom for shirking that implies, because when you have that annual salary without a bonus, which most people work under that system, you're kind of you have to be monitored in some fashion other than what we'd like to think of as the incentivized normal way, which is, well, you'll be paid on how much you produce. But of course, most of us don't produce anything or nothing tangible.
Nothing that we can pick up, add something to, and then pass it on to the next person. So you can't do piecework. And count
as in a pile, I did all these. Well, you can hand out the memos you wrote, but of course, you don't know the relationship between the memos and the profitability. So
I shudder to think of business that paid people based on the number of memos they wrote.
Yeah, you would. Like a nightmare.
Well, so what happened here is, since I can't write contracts that specify all the contingencies that are going to matter, particularly in a complex, interconnected design, production, shipping process, I write contracts that are of a much simpler form, by and large. And that form is, you come to work every day, I'll pay you for the number of hours that you're here, and here's the amount. And you will do what I tell you to do, because minute by minute, the foreman who reports to me can update, okay, that shipment didn't come in. You go get it. You work on this in the meantime. You put these things together. In fact, that morning, I may not know what they're going to do. I don't have the information that I would need to be able to specify, and I can't have the information that I would need to be able to specify all the contingencies in what I want them to do.
So the great insight here, which comes from a paper that's 71 years old, actually, which is, I think that's right. Is that right?
1937.
Yeah, 71 years ago, Ronald Coase wrote an article. There aren't many articles from 71 years ago that people still read, and that's probably because most of them probably aren't worth reading. But 71 years ago, Coase wrote an article that said that it's actually efficient to be inefficient in a sense.
It's dramatically more efficient, yes.
And the term that we now use for those costs of contracting and the costs of making sure that people are keeping the contractual promises they made is transaction costs. That it's not free to transact. It's not free to negotiate and monitor and comply with the contracts that you write.
It's not free to use the price system.
Right. It's an incredible thing, really. And we know that there are many advantages to using the price system, but there are these disadvantages of when people have to interact this way. And so firms exist to overcome within the price system these little islands of centralized.
Yeah, and they're actually responding to the price system in a sense, and that sense is firms exist when it's too expensive to use the price system. It would cost me much more to use the price system.
And of course, at various times, firms do strip off some of their activities because it gets cheaper to make those.
Nobody makes their own furniture. They don't grow their own wheat for the employee cafeteria. Everybody outsources most things, if you think broadly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Think about these transaction costs, and I think maybe some of you out there are wondering, well, what exactly, you say it's hard to make the contract deal with everything. One daily experience that's might be relevant for this is when you do a home improvement or a home repair, and you invite someone into your house, and you've got to figure out how much to pay them. They often all have a bid, but it's funny how often that bid doesn't turn out to be exactly what you pay.
Yeah, like always.
Yeah, because there are these surprises. And what I find fascinating about it is that some workers come to your house, they get paid by the hour. You think, well, that's the right way to do it, because if the job turns out to be more complicated than you thought, that's the right way to do it, because then that person will have to spend more time and they should get more money for that, and that'll make sure they come and do a good job.
Yeah.
Of course, that gives them an incentive to take a really careful, long time at the job. So you think, oh, no, the best way to do it is just to get a flat rate, a bid. Of course, once that is done, sometimes a surprise shows up, and the person on the project says, oh, this was all rotted behind here, so I'm going to have to charge you
no way
more.
of knowing that.
And I had no way of knowing that. And you think, well, that's reasonable. Of course, you rejected the bid of the high bidder who knew that there was a good chance of that.
Yeah.
And you foolishly thought, and all of a sudden you're in this uncomfortable situation where this person who's ripped something off your wall says, well, do you want me to keep going? It's going to cost you an extra blah, blah, blah. Or do you say, no, I'm done. You treated me unfairly. You took advantage of me.
There's almost no way for you to know. I had an experience where I was going to get siding for my house. I was going to insulate, and I didn't want to paint anymore, so I was going to get nice siding for my house. I took 4 bids for this, and my rule is that I take the mean of the bids and then take the one that's closest to that. And so I called the one who had won the bid, and then I called the others and said, we're not going to use you. And the guy who'd given me the low bid said, oh, I really need this job. I'll go 10% lower. And I said, I don't take low bids. And there was this silence on the phone. I said, I don't take low bids. For home improvement, I find that if I take low bids, I end up regretting it, and I find that I spend more. And he cursed at me and hung up the phone.
Understandable.
Well, in his world, that just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, there's a certain, I'm bringing
My time's worth a lot. I don't want to have to talk to this guy again.
Yeah, I'm bringing up the example not so that we'll think too much and too long about home improvement, which we could have a whole show on.
And about bids.
We probably could have a weekly show on it.
But the point is monitoring. The point is, I don't want to have to monitor, and I want to when I take a bid or write a contract, I'll pay a little bit more, just like I'll pay somebody extra, not to have to monitor, and to be sure that they'll go ahead and finish the job at something like that cost. Predictability is worth something.
But the point I want to emphasize is that just getting the bids is costly.
Yeah.
Meeting the guy.
It took me a day.
Meeting the guy at the house, trying to assess whether, it's really the same job. Sometimes a guy will put a bid in and he'll say, oh, and by the way, you need special flashing on that siding thing by the chimney. And so my bid's got that in there. But remember, the other guy who doesn't have that, he's going to end up charging for that, or you're going to have a leak. So just the cost of figuring that out and
using the price system.
Dealing with those multiple people is extremely high.
Yeah.
And of course, some people actually do their own repairs. I don't. I've done
that. That's even more expensive. Let's not talk about that.
Right, that's a whole separate issue of how you make that choice between do it yourself versus bringing in someone else.
It's just a matter of time before my wife calls the plumber anyway.
Yeah, right. But she humors you, doesn't she? Because she likes the idea of you think you can repair it. I know.
Yeah.
My wife does the same thing. Okay, so we've gotten to the point now where we've just to summarize where we are now that we've gone off the home improvement tangent. What firms do is economize on transaction costs. Yes, they forego the benefits of the price system, but they save these transaction costs of negotiation, compliance, monitoring compliance, and so on. And so firms, as we said, there's an ebb and flow. Some firms find it profitable to outsource some of these functions. But the fact that whatever is left at the core of a firm, whether that firm is General Motors, or whether that firm is your local restaurant that you like to go to on the corner, they're all doing the same thing. They're all using centralized economic activity instead of the price system in total. There's some aspects of the price system they are using, but obviously not all.
And there's plenty of competition among these firms, so consumers still get the benefits of the price system.
Yeah, and that's what's rather extraordinary about it. It's not what we typically mean by a mixed economy. What's typically meant by a mixed economy is an economy where the government plays a central role in allocating some resources and the rest is left to the market. Here we're talking about a mixed economy where there are numerous organizations that use command and control and centralization and top-down decision-making as a way of allocating resources. And they are in competition with each other, and that's what disciplines them to excel.
Yep. Well, I want to make sure that the listeners understand the sort of nuts and bolts of how using the price system might be expensive. So in the essay, I talk a bit about the pin factory example. And this is Adam Smith's pin factory example. And in it, he rightly points out that division of labor dramatically reduces cost. And so you divide the task of making pins into these separate tasks. And there's this huge increase in productivity and reduction in cost. Now, suppose you had a pure market pin factory. So the first guy has this wire. And what he could do is take bids from all the different people that are going to use the wire and make a real effort to see maybe who has the highest bid or the next to highest bid because you can trust them more. And somebody buys it, they cut it up into little pin lengths. And then they take bids about people who might use the wire for a bunch of different purposes. Maybe you're going to put heads on them, maybe you're going to sharpen them, maybe you're going to use something else. That would be incredibly expensive. I couldn't possibly do it that way. So in the pin factory, one guy makes the pins, and he just hands them to the next person for free.
Yep.
I have no idea how much they cost. I don't know what he's going to do with them. And when the boss shows up and one of the people hasn't done his job, the guy who sharpens the ends of the pins hasn't done his job, the boss shows up and says, where's the sharp pins? He doesn't say, now who are you again? He says, sir, I'm sorry. I need to get to work right away. And if he didn't do it, I can look. If there's no pile of pins there, he's fired. He's gone. So a lot of these things you can use piecework. It's not quite the same as the price system, but it's closer. His pay is contingent. Now, how much I should pay him for each pin I produce, that's something I kind of have to guess. I have to work that out. But if I can use a piecework system, so in a pin factory, I could use something like a piecework system.
But what you pay, I'm going to interrupt you for a sec. When you decide if you're the boss and you're deciding what to pay the pin sharpener guy, you have two market mechanisms that help you set that rate because you don't decide. I think it's a really important point here is that you don't really decide what to pay your employees. It looks like you do. But what really determines the salary of that pin sharpener is, of course, competition among firms that make pins in trying to attract people to this job.
Yep.
And that what you end up paying that person is going to be reflected not by how nice you are, not by how nice or generous or self-interested the pin sharpener person is, but by the market for pin sharpeners.
The two things that matter are the price of the output, the price of pins, and the wages in a competitive market for pin sharpeners. I can take bids. And
there may be out there in this world, as we pointed out, people who are sharpening pins as a specialized task and selling it separately.
You're welcome to try.
And that's going to discipline my centralized provision of pin sharpening and how much I pay that person. Because I've got to pay that person in my factory enough to keep them from going out and becoming a pin sharpener on their own.
But suppose you're a nice guy, Russ. Suppose you want to pay a little extra, so you pay each of the workers a little more than their wage. Well, you're going to go bankrupt.
I would do that, wouldn't you, Mike? Aren't you a nice guy?
I couldn't. It wouldn't last very long. I am disciplined. I can't charge that extra high price that I could in an actual command and control economy. Suppose it's a socialist economy, and I think, pin sharpener, that's a dangerous job. They should make a little bit more money. And so I pay each of them a little bit more money, and I charge more for pins. I'm the monopoly producer of pins because I'm not disciplined by the market. And if consumers want pins, they have to buy them. They can't go outside. So I'm disciplined in a way by the competition at the final consumer price, and the workers are disciplined by competition for their services. So the price system really does work quite a bit inside the firm. But part of it is that the only information I have is this competition among workers for the job and the price of final output. And, of course, do I go bankrupt?
And in these types of firms that we're talking about, the owner or the manager, and as you said earlier, it's easiest to think about them as the same person because it sharpens, if you'll pardon the phrase,
oh, Lord.
It sharpens the economics a bit. The people who are good at that, the people who are good at owning and starting businesses and managing employees, are the people who are good at this slightly bizarre task that a modern economy has within it, which is the monitoring and understanding of these processes without the benefit of prices. And that's really quite an extraordinary thing. And those folks earn a premium. They make a lot of money because they're good at this very difficult task that is hard to do.
It's an incredibly competitive market for someone who is good at monitoring, at motivating employees, and at finding compensation schemes that elicit better performance at lower cost.
So one of the things we haven't talked about that I'd like to turn to now is the challenge of doing this outside of a production process like pin making, where there's separate tasks, and you can see that the guy didn't sharpen the pins, or you see that the guy made the pins too thin and they don't hold up, and he's doing a bad job lengthening the wire. In a modern economy, which is not a manufacturing economy typically, it's a service economy. A lot of what we're doing doesn't have a tangible visual representation, and it's often done in teams like the manufacturing of pins, but in teams where the individual contribution of the various members is extremely difficult to measure. And that's a specialized challenge for a firm and for economics to understand.
And the thing about team production, we talked about Coase's article in 1937. There was the most famous article, I think, about team production was Elchin and Demsetz in 1973. And what they pointed out was that if you talk about division of labor, you have to take it one more step. And this specialized position called the monitor is the one that may have the most important function in keeping costs down. We may divide labor up, but we also may work together in a team at each stage. It's going to be hard for me to tell who is an example they give is two or three men lifting heavy boxes into a truck. It's hard for me to tell whether someone's doing a good job or a bad job, whether they're shirking. It's a very intensive activity. The monitoring team production is a very intensive activity. Their explanation for the existence of the firm, in fact, was that only in that context can you get people who specialize in monitoring. So it's really an extension of division of labor, which I thought was a brilliant insight.
Yeah, explain that.
Well, if I divide pin making up into various tasks, then maybe I do, maybe I don't need a monitor because it's so easy to tell. I can just use Piecework, and the next guy beyond me in the line can say, hey, what the heck, these pins aren't fastened on right. The heads aren't fastened on right.
And that person could call the boss at home in the bunny slippers and say, hey, by the way,
and
Jack's not doing his job.
That's what Bunny Slippers man was hoping. Just give me a call if something goes wrong. And the problem is he got 500 calls.
And in most forms of production, you can't measure whether people are doing a great job or not. So
no, not even close. Well, so the example that I like to talk about this, and it was a little beyond the scope of the essay, but there's a famous example in China where a group of coolies, a group of workers, were
manual laborers.
They have to pull a barge up the Yangtze River. And so you imagine this barge, the Yangtze is a fast-flowing river, there's this hill beside it, they're walking along this footpath, and they have these ropes, go down to the barge, and they're pulling upstream.
And you can't pull it by yourself. It's too big. You got to have a bunch of people do it.
It takes a large group, 10, 15 guys. And that's if the 10 or 15 guys are pulling hard. And there's a trade-off. Suppose you get 30 guys. Well, they may not be pulling hard. The 30 guys might not be able to pull as well as 10 guys who are working hard. How do you make the 30 guys work hard? The insight of the team production problem is we need division of labor. I can't really, if I'm pulling, I can't spend my time watching you, and you can't spend your time watching me. We'll create a new job called the monitor. And I'll watch, and I'll try to see if your calf muscles are really bunching up, or I'll look to see if you're leaning forward. If you're leaning forward hard, it can only be because you're pulling hard.
See if your shoulders are straining.
Yeah. Now, maybe I could just point it out, and we could use shaming. Jones isn't working again, and everybody would go, oh, that Jones.
Throw him off the team.
We'll throw him off the cliff.
Yeah. Throw him in the water.
But that might not be enough, so we'll give the guy a whip. We'll give the monitor a whip. Now, this looks like slavery. The great thing about this, and this is from an article by an economist named Stephen N.S. Chung, he found that this guy with a whip, and this is the most incredible thing, Russ, this guy with a whip was hired and paid by the coolies.
Not by the ruthless, profit-greedy boss.
These were not slaves. It wasn't the barge owner who hired them. This was the group of coolies. So there's this firm. Let's call it, and the group of coolies, there's no division of labor internally. They all pull.
They're all doing the same thing.
The only problem is team production. But in competing with other groups of manual laborers, they found it to their advantage. They can make more money if they hire this specialized person called the monitor, and if they give him a whip. Because if he really is diligent, if he works hard, he'll never use the whip.
Yeah, that's the irony. You pay him a huge sum of money.
More than any of us make.
To discipline the group, and yet the ideal is he never earns a penny of it.
Because I know he's motivated. Since I've paid him a lot, I know he's motivated. I'll pull, confident that you will pull too, Russ, because I know you wouldn't without a whip.
Absolutely true.
You're just that guy.
I'd be a free rider. I'd be looking like I was pulling. That's what I'm good at.
You might grunt and stuff, be making noises, but...
I use this a variant of this example on talking about people going through revolving doors. If you reach a revolving door at the same time as someone on the other side, what you want to do is put your hands out like you're working really hard, and they'll do all the work.
Yeah, maybe even grimace.
You can definitely grimace, and then you free ride on their hard work.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a stupid example because it's such a minor amount of work. If you try it, you'll find it works. What I like about the example is that it's true. And we all understand that that's not nice, too.
Yeah.
And to most of us would feel foolish trying to...
But probably the other person just thinks, boy, it's kind of hard to press this door because he's pressing too. We're both pressing here. Something wrong with the door.
So as usual, there's a huge practical use of these podcasts. Next time you go through a revolving door, you can delude the person on the other side by looking like you're working hard and make them do all the work. But of course, that's not the point. The point is in a civilized society, pushing is the right thing to do. So you push, and you don't, especially if you see the person on the other side is small, or carrying a bag of groceries.
Well,
or whatever it is.
They're the man with the whip is your conscience.
Right, exactly.
And in many cases, that actually does work. A lot of us don't need the man with the whip.
But with 30 people pulling a barge that's hard work,
sure, day after day.
For some reason, I'm thinking of Take the Money and Run, where Woody Allen is in a chain gang. He puts down his hammer at one point and starts singing a blues song. He's heard one of the other rock breakers sing. Gonna see Miss Liza, gonna go to Mississippi. And I think he doesn't get shot, but it's close. He's so moved by the glory of the song that he stops working.
It's hard to know whether it's stop working or the song that almost got him killed.
The what?
the singing of the song.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Yeah, his version is not quite as authentic or as aesthetically pleasing as the other convict. But at any rate, the Cooley story, the whipping, is remarkable, and it's a true story, right?
Yeah, well, Stephen claimed that it was. I'm confident that it was. It actually makes perfect sense. If groups of us are competing, I can make more money for my family if we make more trips per week along the Yangtze. And so I'm happy to be disciplined. I can make more money by doing it. And if I work hard, I won't be disciplined.
So I throw away money, that's in quotes, I throw away money for a monitor, a whipper, whose explicit goal is to hurt me.
Yeah.
And ideally, I never get whipped, and I just sacrifice some of the joint production of this team in return for the incentives that would not be there otherwise.
Because the joint production is increased more than proportionally. I can pay this monitor and still make more money.
And again, there's this trade-off that we were talking about earlier. That would seem to be a waste. That would seem to be inefficient.
Clearly is. Let's fire him. Let's get rid of that guy. We don't need him.
More for the rest of us.
Yep.
And yet, of course, it turns out there's less for the rest of us.
Yep.
Another example of this kind of trade-off, to see how that trade-off works in action between sort of what we might think of as efficiency when in fact it's not, is you could imagine that the right solution to this problem isn't to hire a monitor, but just have smaller barges.
Yeah.
You just need a one-person barge.
Yeah.
And that way, you've got all the incentives fixed. Mm-hmm. So what the shippers of these materials upriver should solve the problem not by this whipping, which is cruel and inefficient and costly.
We ought to outlaw it.
You just have small barges, and that way you've aligned the incentives perfectly. But of course, a small barge is ineffective. It's inefficient. It has separate costs. Mm-hmm. So a lot of economic activity that we're talking about today is about the tension between gaining something because of one set of incentives that you've got in place and giving it up because of a different set of costs, and trading off between those benefits and costs. And of course, this whipping story, another way to solve it is just to pull barges with people you like, and
that might very well work. It might just be, instead of having a guy with a whip, it could be my family.
Right.
But I have 7 sons, and we will say we're Munger and Sons barge pulling, and we trust each other because we're all in the same family. And over and over again throughout history, that's how this same problem is solved.
Often. But of course, not all families internalize those incentives perfectly. There are plenty of brothers who shirk against their fellow family members, and love is powerful, but not always enough.
Well, no, in fact, Cain was not able to solve this problem.
Good point. Yeah, the problem started early.
Yeah.
I think that's a nice place to stop. As always, Mike, a pleasure talking to you. My guest has been Mike Munger of Duke University. Mike, thanks for being part of EconTalk.
Until next time.
You bet. This is EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. For more EconTalk, go to econtalk.org, where you can also comment on today's podcast and find links and readings related to today's conversation. The sound engineer for EconTalk is Rich Goyette. I'm your host, Russ Roberts. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on Monday.